The fortress of Fallen Reach had stood for 3 centuries, an imposing sentinel guarding the northern pass into the kingdom of Aldenmar. Built of dark granite quarried from the Frostspine Mountains, its walls had never been breached, until today. Thorn Blackwood ducked as another flaming projectile sailed overhead, crashing into the eastern watchtower with a thunderous explosion. Stone and timber rained down, and the screams of the dying filled the smoky air. At 20 summers old, Thorn had been a soldier for barely 2 years, but he knew well enough that Fallen Reach was lost. "Hold the inner bailey!" Captain Herrick bellowed, his voice hoarse from hours of shouting orders amid the chaos. Blood streamed from a gash on his forehead, staining his ornate breastplate. "Archers, concentrate fire on their siege engineers." Thorn knocked another arrow and took aim at the Cordian war machines in the distance. The Empire's forces stretched across the valley floor like a sea of steel and crimson banners. Their strange contraptions, metal beasts that belched fire and hurled boulders, had made short work of Fallen Reach's outer defenses. "There are too many," whispered Roland, Thorn's childhood friend who had joined the garrison alongside him. "We cannot hold." "We must," Thorn replied, loosing his arrow. It found its mark in the throat of a Cordian officer, but for every enemy that fell, 10 more seemed to take their place. If Fallen Reach falls, the capital will have no warning. A horn blasted from the western wall, 3 long notes followed by 2 short. The signal for retreat to the inner keep. Captain Herrick grabbed Thorn's shoulder, his fingers digging through the leather padding. "Blackwood, I need you to take this," he said, pressing a sealed scroll into Thorn's hands. "It contains our intelligence on the Cordian forces, their numbers, their weapons, their plans. The king must know what we face." "Sir, I cannot leave my post." "This is an order, soldier. Take the hidden passage beneath the commander's quarters. It will lead you through the mountains. Reach Whitehaven and warn them of what comes." Before Thorn could protest further, the main gate splintered with a deafening crack. The battering ram had done its work. Cordian soldiers poured through the breach like a flood of gleaming armor and sharp steel. "Go! Now!" Captain Herrick shoved him toward the keep, then turned to face the enemy, sword drawn. "Roland, with me. We buy him time." The last Thorn saw of his friend was Roland's grim smile as he knocked his final arrow. "See you in the halls of our ancestors, Thorn." Thorn ran, the scroll clutched tight against his chest, his heart heavier than the armor he wore. The inner keep was already in chaos, soldiers preparing for a last stand, wounded men dragging themselves to whatever cover they could find. He pushed past them all, making for the commander's quarters at the top of the central tower. Commander Valerian lay dead across his desk, a Cordian assassin's blade protruding from his back. The room had been ransacked, but the assassin was gone. Thorn pulled aside the heavy tapestry depicting the founding of Aldenmar, revealing the small door behind it. As he fumbled with the mechanism to open the passage, a cold voice spoke from the doorway. "Fleeing so soon, Aldenmarian dog?" Thorn turned to face a towering figure in ornate black armor inlaid with gold. General Vexus, commander of the Cordian invasion force, was instantly recognizable by the horned helmet that concealed all but his eyes, cold and gray as winter steel. "Your fortress has fallen. Your comrades die as we speak. Surrender, and perhaps I will be merciful." In answer, Thorn drew his sword. It seemed a pitiful thing against the general's massive blade, but he would not die a coward. Vexus laughed, the sound hollow within his helmet. "Brave. Futile, but brave." The general lunged with impossible speed for one so large. Thorn parried desperately, the impact jarring his arm to the shoulder. He countered with a thrust, but Vexus batted it aside effortlessly. Their blades met 3 times in rapid succession, each blow driving Thorn back toward the wall. "You fight well, for a border guardsman," Vexus said, almost conversationally. "But you are no match for one trained in the fighting pits of Cord." The next blow knocked Thorn's sword from his grasp. He staggered back, defenseless, as Vexus raised his blade for the killing stroke. In desperation, Thorn grabbed the commander's heavy oak chair and hurled it at the general. It struck Vexus squarely, throwing him off balance just long enough for Thorn to dive for the secret passage. He slammed the hidden door shut as Vexus roared in rage. The narrow tunnel was pitch black, but Thorn ran blindly, guided by one hand on the rough stone wall. Behind him, he heard the splintering of wood as Vexus hacked through the door. The passage descended sharply, twisting through the heart of the mountain. When he finally emerged hours later, gasping for breath in the cold mountain air, Fallen Reach was a distant pyre against the night sky. The fortress that had never fallen was now a funeral beacon for all who had died defending it. Thorn clutched the scroll tighter, feeling the weight of responsibility settle upon him. Roland, Captain Herrick, Commander Valerian, their sacrifices would mean nothing if he failed to reach Whitehaven with his warning. The road ahead wound through the treacherous Frostspine Mountains, a journey of many days through lands now likely crawling with Cordian scouts. But there was no alternative. The fate of Aldenmar rested on his shoulders now. With one last look at the burning fortress, Thorn Blackwood turned and disappeared into the wilderness, unaware that his path would soon cross with the kingdom's most unlikely savior, and the last of a legendary breed of warriors long thought extinct. 7 days of relentless travel had left Thorn Blackwood at the edge of exhaustion. The Frostspine Mountains were unforgiving even in summer, and twice he had narrowly avoided Cordian scouting parties sweeping the foothills. His provisions had dwindled to a handful of dried berries and a strip of tough jerky. The sealed scroll from Captain Herrick remained secure in his leather pouch, its weight a constant reminder of his duty. As the 8th day dawned with a pale sun struggling through heavy clouds, Thorn found himself following a narrow game trail into a secluded valley. Legend spoke of hermits and outcasts dwelling in these remote reaches, and he hoped to find shelter, perhaps even food, before continuing his journey to Whitehaven. The valley opened before him like a hidden world. Unlike the barren slopes surrounding it, this place was lush with vegetation, ancient pines and broadleaf trees he couldn't name. A stream cut through its center, and in the distance, smoke rose from what appeared to be a chimney. Someone's out here after all, Thorn murmured to himself, relief washing over him. He had seen no friendly face since Fallen Reach fell. As he approached the source of the smoke, the trees thinned to reveal a sprawling compound. Several wooden structures surrounded a central lodge built of massive timber and stone. But what froze Thorn in his tracks wasn't the unexpected settlement, it was what stood in the adjacent meadow. Mammoths. At least a dozen of them. Their massive forms grazed peacefully, tusks gleaming in the morning light. Some were draped with what looked like armor plating along their flanks. Others wore elaborate saddles with mounted crossbows or spear racks. War mammoths, beasts of legend that hadn't been seen in Aldenmar for nearly 50 years. "That's close enough, stranger," called a stern voice. Thorn spun to find himself facing a woman with a loaded crossbow. She was tall and powerfully built, perhaps 40 years old, with auburn hair streaked with silver and braided tightly against her head. Her weathered face bore a long scar from temple to jaw on the right side, and her eyes, sharp as a hawk's, studied him with open suspicion. "I mean no harm," Thorn said, slowly raising his hands. "I'm a soldier of Aldenmar, from Fallen Reach Garrison." "Fallen Reach?" The woman lowered her crossbow slightly. "What news from the border fortress?" "Fallen. The Cordians have breached our northern defenses. I carry urgent intelligence for Whitehaven." The woman's expression hardened. "So it begins again." She gestured toward the lodge with her crossbow. "Come. You look half dead, and a corpse can't deliver messages." Inside the lodge, warmth from a massive hearth eased the chill from Thorn's bones. The walls were adorned with weapons, maps, and most strikingly, the preserved head of a mammoth, its tusks curving majestically around the fireplace. The woman handed him a bowl of hearty stew and a chunk of coarse bread, which he devoured with barely restrained desperation. "I am Aaron Stormcaller," she said when he had finished. "Last of the Mammoth keepers of Alden Mar." Thorn nearly choked on his final mouthful. The Mammoth keepers were part of history, elite cavalry who had once formed the kingdom's most formidable military force. Their mounts could break enemy formations with a single charge, their armored hides impervious to most weapons. "But the keepers were disbanded decades ago," he said. "After the Civil War, when King Roderick seized the throne." Aaron's eyes flashed with old anger. "Disbanded is a polite way of putting it. Betrayed is more accurate. Roderick feared our power and loyalty to his brother. Those who didn't flee were executed as traitors." She gestured to the scar on her face. "I escaped with this reminder and a handful of calves and breeding adults. We've lived here ever since, keeping the bloodlines pure, training in the old ways." "For what purpose?" Thorn asked. "If the king branded you traitors." "Kings rise and fall," Aaron said sharply. "The Mammoths remain. As do the threats to Alden Mar." She leaned forward, her gaze intense. "Now tell me everything about this Cordian invasion." Thorn recounted the fall of Fallen Reach in detail, the overwhelming numbers, the strange war machines, General Vexus's terrifying presence, and the contents of the scroll he carried. Aaron listened in silence, her face growing grimmer with each passing moment. "These metal beasts you describe," she said when he finished. "They sound like the fire drakes of old Cordian legend, war machines powered by alchemical fire. If they've rediscovered that lost technology, conventional defenses won't stand against them." "Then Alden Mar is doomed," Thorn said bleakly. Aaron rose and walked to a map of the kingdom pinned to the wall. "Not necessarily. Firedrakes are formidable but not invincible. They're slow to maneuver and vulnerable from the rear." She traced a path with her finger. "If Vexus follows the main road, as your intelligence suggests, he'll have to pass through Broken Vale to reach Whitehaven. The terrain there would favor an ambush. By a dozen mammoths against an army of thousands?" Thorn couldn't keep the skepticism from his voice. Aaron turned to him, a fierce pride in her eyes. "One war mammoth in the right place is worth 100 conventional cavalry. A dozen, properly deployed, could change the course of a battle. Even if that's true, why would you help? The crown betrayed you." "I serve Alden Mar, not its crown." Aaron's voice softened slightly. "This is my home too, boy. I won't see it fall to foreign invaders because of old grudges." She studied him thoughtfully. "You've shown courage getting this far. How would you like to deliver your warning mounted on a war mammoth? That should get the court's attention." Before Thorn could respond, a horn blast shattered the silence outside. Aaron was instantly alert, grabbing a massive war axe from the wall. "Cordian scouts," she said grimly. "They must have followed your trail. They burst outside to chaos." 3 mammoth riders were already mounting up, while others ran for weapons. At the edge of the compound, 5 Cordian soldiers in crimson uniforms had emerged from the tree line, clearly surprised to discover the settlement. "Hide if you wish," Aaron told Thorn as she swung herself onto the back of a massive bull mammoth that had approached at her whistle. "Or fight. Your choice will tell me much about you." Without waiting for his answer, she urged her mount forward with a guttural command. The mammoth trumpeted defiantly and charged, shaking the ground with each thunderous step. Thorn hesitated only a moment before drawing his sword and running after her. If this woman and her war mammoths were Alden Mar's last hope, he wouldn't cower while they fought his battle. As he joined the fray, Thorn witnessed firsthand the awesome power of a war mammoth in combat. Aaron's mount swept aside 2 Cordians with a single swing of its tusks, while she dispatched another with her axe. The remaining scouts turned to flee, but the other riders cut off their escape. Within minutes, it was over. 4 Cordians lay dead, while the 5th knelt as prisoner, trembling at the sight of Aaron's bloodied axe. "There will be more," she said, dismounting in one fluid motion. "Their commander will send a larger force when these don't return." "Then we should leave immediately," Thorn urged. "Complete my mission to Whitehaven." Aaron shook her head. "Not yet. First, you need to meet someone." She led him toward a separate enclosure at the far end of the compound. Inside stood the largest mammoth Thorn had ever seen, a hulking mountain of muscle and fur, with tusks as long as spears, banded with iron rings inscribed with ancient runes. "This is Goliath," Aaron said, her voice filled with reverence. "Last descendant of the royal battle mammoths. He's never accepted a rider, but he might make an exception for you." "Me?" Thorn stared in disbelief. "I'm no mammoth keeper. I'm just a soldier. Sometimes fate chooses unlikely champions." Aaron fixed him with a penetrating gaze. "Aldenmar needs more than a messenger now. It needs a symbol, a reminder of its greatest warriors returning when all seems lost." She pressed something into his hand, a curved knife carved from mammoth ivory. "Tonight, you'll undertake the bonding ritual. If Goliath accepts you, we ride for Whitehaven at dawn. If not..." She shrugged. "Then at least you died trying to save your kingdom." As Thorn gazed up at the enormous beast, whose intelligent eyes seemed to study him with equal curiosity, he realized his mission had become something far greater than delivering a warning. Somehow, in this hidden valley, he had stumbled upon Aldenmar's last, desperate hope. The moon hung full and bright above the valley as Thorn stood before the circle of stones, an ancient place, Aaron had explained, where mammoth keepers had performed the bonding ritual for generations. Torches flickered around the perimeter, casting long shadows across the frost-covered ground. The other keepers, 7 men and women who had followed Aaron into exile, watched in solemn silence. At the center of the circle stood Goliath, his massive form silhouetted against the night sky. The war mammoth's breath formed clouds of vapor in the cold air, and his small eyes reflected the torchlight like twin embers. "Are you certain this is necessary?" Thorn asked, gripping the ivory knife Aaron had given him. His voice sounded thin in the vast silence. "I only need to deliver my message. I'm no rider." Aaron stood beside him, dressed in ceremonial leathers adorned with mammoth bone talismans. "The ritual has purpose beyond practicality. It forms a connection that cannot be broken, a bond of trust that will serve you both in battle." She gestured toward Goliath. "He has been waiting for a worthy rider. I believe you are that person." "What makes you so sure?" "He hasn't tried to kill you yet," she said with the ghost of a smile. "That's more tolerance than he's shown anyone in years." Before Thorn could respond, Aaron raised her arms and began to chant in an ancient tongue, the language of the first mammoth keepers, preserved through centuries. The other keepers joined in, their voices rising and falling like the wind through mountain passes. "Approach the beast," Aaron instructed when the chant subsided. "Let him know your scent, your touch. If he accepts you, he will kneel." Thorn swallowed hard and stepped forward. Goliath towered above him, a mountain of muscle and fur that could crush him with a single movement. The mammoth's tusks, banded with iron and etched with battle runes, curved outward like massive scythes. "I am Thorn Blackwood," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. "I seek your aid in battle against our common enemy." Goliath's trunk extended, snaking toward him with surprising delicacy. Thorn stood perfectly still as the sensitive appendage explored his face, his shoulders, his chest. The mammoth's breath was warm against his skin, smelling of grass and earth. "Now the blood oath," Aaron said quietly. "A token sacrifice to seal the bond." Thorn raised the ivory knife and, with a swift motion, cut his palm. Blood welled from the wound, dark in the torchlight. Following Aaron's silent gesture, he extended his bleeding hand toward Goliath. The mammoth's trunk wrapped gently around his wrist, lifting his hand. For a heart-stopping moment, Thorn thought the beast might crush his bones. Instead, Goliath brought the bleeding palm to his own forehead, marking himself with Thorn's blood. A collective murmur rose from the watching keepers. Aaron's eyes widened in surprise. "What is it?" Thorn whispered, not daring to move. "He's accepting the old bond," she replied. "The deepest form of connection. It hasn't been seen in 3 generations." With a sound like distant thunder, Goliath lowered himself to his front knees. The mammoth's head bowed, bringing his eyes level with Thorn's. "Place your forehead against his," Aaron instructed. "Complete the bond." Thorn leaned forward until his skin touched the rough hide of Goliath's brow. A strange sensation washed over him, a primal connection, as if something ancient and powerful had reached into his mind and taken root there. "I feel something," he gasped. "Like I can sense his thoughts." "Not thoughts as we understand them," Aaron said. "Impressions. Emotions. Intentions. The bond allows a form of communication beyond words. It will grow stronger with time." When Thorn finally stepped back, Goliath rose to his full height once more, but something had changed. The mammoth's posture seemed alert, protective, a silent declaration that he had chosen his rider. "The ritual is complete," Aaron announced. Thorn Blackwood is now a mammoth keeper, bonded to Goliath, last of the royal battle mammoths. The assembled keepers thumped their chests in acknowledgement, their expressions a mixture of respect and lingering skepticism. Thorn understood their reservations. He was an outsider, untrained in their ways, suddenly elevated to ride their greatest champion. "Don't look so worried," Aaron told him as they walked back to the compound. "The bond is formed, but mastery will take time. We have work to do before you're ready for battle." The next 7 days were the most grueling of Thorn's life. Each morning began before dawn with basic riding exercises, learning to mount the towering beast, to sit properly in the war saddle, to maintain balance during movement. Goliath was patient but unforgiving of mistakes, dumping Thorn unceremoniously to the ground when he gave incorrect signals or lost concentration. "He respects strength and clarity," Aaron explained after one particularly painful fall. "Hesitation reads as weakness. Command with confidence, even if you don't feel it." By the 3rd day, Thorn could direct Goliath's movements with voice commands and pressure from his legs. The 4th day brought weapons training, learning to wield a spear and bow from mammoth back, striking targets while in motion. His arms ached from the strain of controlling the massive beast while maintaining accuracy. "The mammoth is not merely a mount," Aaron coached. "He is your partner in combat. Learn to fight as one being. Let him handle movement while you focus on the enemy." On the 5th day, they ventured into the mountains, where Thorn learned to navigate treacherous terrain, something the war mammoths could do with surprising agility despite their size. Goliath seemed to enjoy these excursions, trumpeting with what sounded like excitement as they climbed steep ridges and forded icy streams. The 6th day brought combat training against the other keepers. 3 riders attacked simultaneously, testing Thorn's ability to maneuver in battle conditions. Goliath responded to his commands with increasing precision, allowing him to parry, dodge, and counterattack against multiple opponents. "He's learning you as much as you're learning him," Aaron observed. "The bond strengthens each day." And indeed, Thorn could feel it. A growing awareness of Goliath's moods and intentions, a subtle communication that transcended normal animal training. Sometimes he would know which way the mammoth would turn before Goliath moved, or sense the beast's hunger or thirst without any outward sign. On the morning of the 7th day, as Thorn prepared for his final training session, a rider burst into the compound at full gallop. It was Livia, one of the younger keepers who had been scouting the eastern passes. "Courtians," she shouted, pulling her mammoth to a halt. "A full battalion, moving through Oakfire Valley. They'll reach Whitehaven within 5 days. Erin's face grew grim. Faster than we anticipated. They must have found a shortcut through the mountains. She turned to Thorn. Your training will have to suffice. We ride at midday. As the compound erupted into activity, keepers preparing armor, loading supplies, checking weapons, Thorn sought out Goliath in his enclosure. The mammoth was already restless, perhaps sensing the urgency in the air. Are we ready for this? Thorn asked softly, placing his hand on the beast's massive shoulder. A week ago, I was just a soldier. Now I'm supposed to ride you into battle against an army. Goliath's trunk wrapped gently around Thorn's arm, squeezing with surprising tenderness. Through their bond, Thorn felt something that might have been reassurance, a steady confidence that contrasted with his own doubts. By midday, the mammoth keepers were assembled and ready. 8 riders in total, including Thorn and Erin, each mounted on a war mammoth fitted with armor plates across vital areas. The beasts were draped in the traditional blue and silver of the keepers, colors not seen in Aldenmar for decades. Erin addressed them before departure, her voice carrying across the valley. Today we return from exile, not to seek forgiveness or restoration, but to defend our homeland when it needs us most. The throne may have betrayed us, but the people of Aldenmar remain our people. We ride for them. She turned to Thorn, seated high atop Goliath. You carry not only your warning but our redemption. Through you, the mammoth keepers will reclaim their honor. As they set out, following the hidden trails that would lead them to Whitehaven, Thorn felt the weight of dual responsibilities, his duty as a messenger and his new role as a keeper. The ivory knife Erin had given him for the ritual now hung from his belt, a symbol of his transformation. From atop Goliath, the world looked different. The forest paths that had seemed treacherous on foot now opened before him, the great mammoth finding sure footing where a horse would falter. They made good progress through the afternoon, covering ground that would have taken Thorn days to traverse alone. As dusk approached, they reached a high ridge overlooking the western plains. In the distance, columns of smoke rose from several points, villages burning, Erin explained grimly. The Cordian advance had begun. General Vexus leaves nothing standing in his path, Thorn said, remembering the merciless efficiency with which the Cordian commander had taken Fallen Reach. By the time we reach Whitehaven, half the kingdom may be in ashes. Then we'll need to make our arrival count, Erin replied. 8 war mammoths won't win this conflict alone. We need the kingdom's armies, united under a single banner. As night fell and they made camp on the protected side of the ridge, Thorn found himself stroking Goliath's trunk while the mammoth rested. Through their bond, he sensed the beast's anticipation, not fear, but a readiness for the coming battle. I'll try to be worthy of you, Thorn promised quietly. Together, perhaps we can make a difference. Beneath a canopy of stars, the last of the mammoth keepers prepared to emerge from legend and rejoin the world. Whether as saviors or merely as witnesses to Aldenmar's fall remained to be seen, but Thorn knew one thing with certainty, the bond between man and mammoth had changed him irrevocably. He was no longer just a survivor of Fallen Reach. He was a mammoth keeper, and tomorrow they would begin writing a new chapter in the kingdom's history, one that General Vexus and his Cordian invaders would not expect. Part 4, The Enemy Within. Blood and mud caked Thanor's leathers as he fought his way toward Commander Auric. The battle had transformed with Varen's arrival. What was once a desperate last stand had become a chaotic melee with pockets of fierce fighting across the pass. Calgrim's enormous form moved through the battlefield like a living siege engine, each swing of his tusks clearing swathes of enemy warriors. Commander! Thanor shouted, finally reaching Auric's position behind a hastily reinforced barricade. Something's wrong. Auric wiped blood from his face, his breathing labored. Explain. The Blackfang warlord, he's pulled back his elite guard. They're not engaging. Thanor pointed to the eastern ridge where Krozak and at least 50 mounted warriors had withdrawn from the main battle. They're circling around. Realization dawned on Oryx's face. The shepherd's path. We sealed it with rockfall during the first assault, but if they've found a way through, they'll flank us entirely, Bridget finished, joining them. Her armor was dented and her shield arm hung limp at her side. We don't have enough men to defend a second front. Oryx surveyed what remained of his force, barely 30 fighters still standing, many wounded. They were holding the main pass entrance, but only because Varen and Calgrim had broken the Blackfang's momentum. If attacked from behind, they would collapse instantly. I'll go, Thaner said, checking his remaining arrows, just 3. I know those back trails better than anyone. Alone? Against 50 elite warriors? Bridget shook her head. That's suicide. A thunderous crash interrupted them as Calgrim smashed through a Blackfang shield wall nearby. Varen leapt from the mammoth's back, his axe cleaving through 2 warriors before he rolled and came up fighting beside his mount. Together, they were unstoppable, but they were also just one unit, fighting in one place. Varen! Oryx called out. We need the mammoth. Varen dispatched his current opponent with a savage blow, then whistled sharply. Calgrim immediately disengaged, trunk wrapping around a Blackfang warrior and hurling him into his comrades as the mammoth lumbered toward Oryx's position. Never thought I'd see you again, Commander, Varen said, his voice gruff with exertion. His face was leaner than Oryx remembered, weathered by years in the northern wilderness, but his eyes held the same intensity. Especially not in battle. No time for reunions, Oryx explained the situation rapidly. Thaner knows the path, but he can't hold it alone. Varen looked at the ranger appraisingly. So you're the scout everyone whispers about. The ghost of the borderlands. And you're the exile with the mammoth, Thaner replied coolly. Impressive entrance, but it won't matter if they outflank us. Varen nodded decisively. Calgrim can move faster than their horses on these mountain trails. We'll beat them to the shepherd's path and collapse it properly. I'm coming with you, Thaner insisted. You don't know the quickest route. Go, Oryx ordered. Bridget and I will hold here as long as we can. If we fall back, we'll retreat toward the inner pass. Meet us there. As Varen remounted Calgrim, Thaner hesitated. Commander, there's something else. I've been watching the Blackfang formations. They're too coordinated for a horde. Someone's been feeding them information about our defenses. Bridget's eyes widened. A traitor? Among us? There's no time to root out spies now, Oryx said grimly. Go. Stop that flanking force. We'll deal with traitors after we survive this day. Thaner climbed nimbly up Calgrim's side, settling behind Varen in the massive war saddle. The mammoth trumpeted once, then turned and began moving with surprising stealth for such a large creature, picking a path along the ridge above the main battle. From this height, the scale of the conflict became clear. Perhaps 1,000 Blackfang warriors still pressed the defenders, while Krozak and his elite unit were indeed circling toward a narrow ravine that would lead them behind Oryx's position. There, Thaner pointed to a barely visible game trail that cut across the mountainside. It's steep but Calgrim can manage it. We'll intercept them before they reach the shepherd's path. Varen guided the mammoth onto the precarious trail without hesitation. How did you end up at Grimhold? He asked as they navigated the treacherous terrain. You're not Legion. I have my reasons for wanting the Blackfang stopped, Thaner replied cryptically. What about you? Last I heard, you were living as a hermit beyond the ice lakes. Quite the journey to make for a kingdom that cast you out. Varen's shoulders tensed. Red Creek was complicated. I disobeyed a direct order, saved a village of innocents instead of executing a strategic retreat. High Command called it treason. I called it conscience. And now you've returned to fight for those who branded you traitor? I'm not fighting for the crown, Varen said firmly. I'm fighting for the people who would die if Grimhold falls. Thaner fell silent, studying the man before him with newfound respect. Below them, the winding path descended toward a narrow gorge where the shepherd's path emerged from the mountains. They had perhaps minutes before Krozak's forces would arrive. There, Thaner pointed to a section of the cliffside riddled with cracks. "That's our best chance to bring down enough rock to seal the path." Varen nodded, guiding Kalgrim to a ledge overlooking the spot. "The Mammoth can trigger it, but we'll need to place charges precisely. One mistake and we bring the mountain down on ourselves instead." As they dismounted, a movement caught Thaner's eye, a flash of Legion armor moving through the rocks ahead. "We're not alone," he whispered, drawing his curved blade. Varen gripped his axe. "Krozak scouts?" "No," Thaner's eyes narrowed. "Legion uniform." "You're traitor, I think." They advanced cautiously, Kalgrim remaining on the ledge above. As they rounded a boulder, they came face to face with a Legion soldier, one of Oric's own men, methodically removing rockfall from the blocked shepherd's path. He'd already cleared enough space for riders to pass single file. "Gareth?" Varen recognized the man from years ago. "You were a lieutenant under Oric." Gareth spun, drawing his sword. "Varen Frostborn. The disgraced hero returns." His laugh was bitter. "How fitting. Two traitors meeting at the end. The only traitor I see is wearing Legion colors while clearing a path for the enemy," Thaner said coldly, his blade gleaming in the afternoon light. "The Legion?" Gareth spat. "They left us to die countless times. High Command sits in their comfortable castle while we bleed on foreign soil. The Black Fang at least reward loyalty with gold and position." "At the cost of innocent lives," Varen growled. "War always costs innocent lives," Gareth retorted. "Ask the families of those who died at Red Creek because of your disobedience." Varen's face darkened. "Red Creek was different. Was it? Or did you simply decide your judgment was better than your commander's? Just as I've decided mine is better than Oric's futile last stand." Gareth raised his sword. "Krozak's forces will be here any moment. You're too late." "Not quite," Thaner said, his gaze shifting to something behind Gareth. The traitor turned just in time to see Kalgrim's massive form appear on the path behind him, trunk raised menacingly. As Gareth stood frozen between the Mammoth and the two warriors, distant hoofbeats echoed through the gorge. Krozak's elite force had arrived at the entrance to the shepherd's path. The battle for Grimhold's survival was about to enter its most desperate phase. The setting sun cast long shadows across Grimhold Pass as Krozak's elite forces discovered the shepherd's path, and the war mammoth blocking it. Gareth lay unconscious, bound and gagged behind a boulder where Thaner had hidden him after their confrontation. The traitor would face justice later, if any of them survived. "They're coming up the main path now," Thaner reported, sliding down from his vantage point. 50 riders, heavily armed. Krozak leads them personally. Varen stood beside Kalgrim, running a hand along the mammoth's battle-scarred hide. "We've faced worse odds, old friend." "Have we?" Thaner asked skeptically. "No," Varen admitted with a grim smile. "But it sounds better than saying we're about to die." They had prepared what defenses they could in the short time available. Loose boulders positioned to roll down on the approaching forces, makeshift caltrops scattered across the narrowest sections of the path, and the few explosive charges they had brought from the main battlefield strategically placed where they might trigger a larger rockfall. Below, in the main pass, Commander Oric and the remaining defenders had been pushed back to their final position, a natural bottleneck where the pass narrowed before opening into the fertile lowlands beyond. If they fell, nothing would stop the Black Fang from ravaging the kingdom's heartland. "You should know something," Thaner said suddenly, checking the edge of his curved blade. "I wasn't entirely truthful about why I came to Grimhold." Varen raised an eyebrow. "Somehow I'm not surprised. 15 years ago, I was a boy in a village called Ash Creek, just south of Red Creek. Thaner's voice remained steady, but his eyes held old pain. When the order came to abandon Red Creek to the enemy, Ash Creek wasn't even considered worth mentioning in the strategic calculations. Understanding dawned on Varen's face. You were there when I disobeyed orders. Thaner nodded. My family, my entire village, survived because one Mammoth rider decided people mattered more than strategy. He extended his hand. Whatever happens next, I fight with you not because Auric ordered it, but because I choose to. Varen clasped Thaner's forearm firmly. Then let's make it count. The first of Krozak's riders appeared around the bend, halting abruptly at the sight of the war mammoth and the two warriors standing defiantly in their path. The warlord himself pushed to the front of his formation, his skull helmet masking his features except for piercing yellow eyes. The legendary exile returns, Krozak's voice boomed through the gorge. Varen Frostborn and the last war mammoth. Your head will make a fine trophy, and your beast's tusks will adorn my hull. You'll have to take them, Varen called back, lifting his battle-axe. Krozak laughed. One man, one beast, and a shadow skulker against 50 of my finest? This won't even qualify as a battle. Then why are you still talking? Thaner taunted, moving to a position among the rocks where his remaining arrows would be most effective. With a roar of rage, Krozak signaled the charge. The narrow path forced his riders to come 3 abreast at most, still overwhelming odds, but better than facing them on open ground. Varen triggered the first trap, sending boulders tumbling onto the lead riders. Horses screamed, men fell, but the column pushed forward relentlessly. Kalgrim trumpeted his challenge and charged into the advancing line, tusks sweeping riders from their mounts. Varen fought at the mammoth's side, his axe a blur of lethal precision. Thaner's arrows found vulnerable points in armor from his hidden position, each shot eliminating one of Krozak's elite warriors. For precious minutes, they held the path against impossible odds. Krozak himself engaged Varen, his barbed war hammer clashing against the ranger's axe in a shower of sparks. They were evenly matched in strength, but Varen's years in the northern wilderness had honed his endurance. Slowly, he began to push the warlord back. You fight well for an outcast, Krozak grunted as they locked weapons. You talk too much for a dead man, Varen replied, breaking the lock with a sudden twist and landing a glancing blow on Krozak's shoulder. Meanwhile, Thaner had exhausted his arrows and joined the fray with his curved blade, moving like smoke between opponents, striking vulnerable points with surgical precision. But even their combined skill couldn't hold forever against such numbers. Injuries accumulated, a deep cut across Varen's thigh, a dented plate in Kalgrim's armor that had the mammoth favoring his left side, a slash across Thaner's ribs that left his leathers dark with blood. Below, in the main pass, the situation had grown equally desperate. Through a gap in the rocks, Varen glimpsed Auric's forces making their final stand. Without reinforcement, they would fall within the hour. We need to end this now, Varen shouted to Thaner over the clash of battle. The explosives, the whole cliffside. Thaner understood immediately. Their original plan had been to collapse a section of the path, blocking Krozak's forces from reaching the main battlefield. But there was a more drastic option, bringing down the entire cliff face, which would bury the shepherd's path completely. And everyone on it. You can't be serious, Thaner shouted back, dispatching another of Krozak's warriors. That's suicide. Not for you. Varen fought his way to Kalgrim's side. Get to Auric. Tell him to pull his forces back to the inner pass immediately. And leave you here? Alone? I came to Grimhold seeking redemption, not survival, Varen said, a strange peace settling over his features. Kalgrim and I will hold them here while you set the main charges. Go. Thaner hesitated only a moment before slipping away through the rocks, moving toward the larger explosive caches they had positioned. Varen turned to Kalgrim, pressing his forehead against the mammoth's trunk in a silent moment of communion. The beast rumbled understanding. They had always communicated beyond words. "One last charge, old friend," Varen whispered. "Make it glorious." With renewed vigor, man and mammoth plunged back into battle, driving deeper into Krozak's forces, drawing them further along the shepherd's path. Kalgrim's massive form became a living battering ram, tusks sweeping opponents aside, trunk seizing warriors and hurling them from the cliff. Varen fought like a man possessed, each swing of his axe finding its mark with devastating precision. Krozak, realizing something had changed, ordered his remaining forces to push past the mammoth toward the main pass. "Kill the exile," he bellowed. "The mammoth is just a beast." "This beast has more honor than your entire horde," Varen shouted back, guiding Kalgrim to block their advance. They had reached the widest section of the path now, where it curved around an outcropping, directly beneath the weakest section of the cliff face. From his position higher on the ridge, Thaner had finished placing the charges. He caught Varen's eye across the battlefield and nodded grimly. The mammoth rider acknowledged with a barely perceptible nod of his own. In the main pass below, Oryx's forces suddenly began an orderly withdrawal toward the inner defenses. Thaner had delivered the warning. Now all that remained was the final act. Varen positioned Kalgrim with his back to the cliff wall, facing outward toward the remaining Blackfang warriors. Krozak, sensing victory, pressed forward eagerly, not realizing he was being drawn perfectly into position. "Any last words, exile?" the warlord sneered. Varen smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his battle-hardened face. Red Creek was worth it. Before Krozak could respond, a series of explosions rocked the mountainside above them. Rocks began to fall, slowly at first, then in a cascading avalanche as the entire cliff face sheared away. Krozak's eyes widened in comprehension and terror as he realized the trap. The last thing Thaner saw before dust obscured the scene was Varen standing tall atop Kalgrim, axe raised in final defiance as the mountain came down around them, carrying Blackfang warriors, the mammoth rider, and the warlord himself into oblivion. The rumble of the collapse echoed throughout Grimhold Pass, causing the remaining Blackfang forces to falter in confusion. When their warlord did not reappear and no flanking attack materialized, uncertainty spread through their ranks. Sensing the shift, Oryx ordered a counterattack. By nightfall, the demoralized horde had been pushed back beyond the eastern ridge. Days later, when the dust settled and the battlefield was cleared, they found Varen's axe embedded in a boulder at the edge of the collapsed path, the only remnant of the mammoth rider and his war mount. Commander Oryx ordered it left in place, a monument to the sacrifice that had saved Grimhold Pass. As for Thaner, he disappeared the night after the battle, as silently as he had arrived. Some claimed they saw him heading north, toward the remote cabin where Varen had lived in exile. Others insisted he had gone to hunt down scattered remnants of the Blackfang horde. In the years that followed, the tale of the war mammoth and its rider grew into legend, how victory seemed impossible until a man and his mammoth rushed in to defeat the enemy. In taverns across the kingdom, bards sang of Varen Frostborn, once branded traitor, now remembered as hero. Of Kalgrim, the last war mammoth, whose final charge collapsed a mountain. And sometimes, in the quieter verses, they spoke of the Shadow Walker who fought beside them, ensuring their sacrifice would be remembered. At Grimhold Pass, where Varen's axe stood weathered but unbowed, travelers would often leave small tokens, a soldier's medallion, a child's carved wooden mammoth, a ranger's arrow. Reminders that sometimes, the most unlikely heroes emerge when victory seems most impossible.